Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. But then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Hello and welcome to Baldur's Gate 3, or should I say Avatar: The Last Airbender, because today, as you might have guessed from the title, I will be playing as the Avatar, the master of all four elements. The twist is, of course, I'm gonna have to learn them all first. I'll start by knowing airbending, but to learn the rest of the elements, I'm gonna have to work for it. To learn waterbending, I have to beat the goblin leaders. To learn earthbending, I have to beat Kefric. And to learn firebending, I have to beat Gortash. So that's the plan. I'll master the elements, then use my powers to restore balance to the world. Of course I'll be playing as a monk. Yep, looks like Aang to me. But he's older and maybe slightly depressed. And there he is, he emerges from his pod. He's been in there for 100 years, and the world is different now. Like, really different. Now Aang can't airbend just yet. He's a little bit out of practice, but he does have his trusty staff to fight with. However, I won't allow Aang to punch, because I don't remember him ever punching in the show. From there, I move on to the helm, where I get attacked by firebenders. I manage to escape with my life, and my first priority is to make some friends. Because of course, the Avatar is gonna need the help of friends in order to save the world. So I go ahead and recruit Shadowheart, or should I say Katara. Yep, she's gonna be our waterbender. Waterbenders can heal, and she's a cleric, so I think she fits pretty well. As for her brother Sokka, I decided Gale could play that role, for no other reason than he's the first guy I encountered. And there we have it. Team Avatar is assembled, but we really need to level up. Because currently, Aang can't airbend, Katara can barely waterbend, and to be honest, I don't really know what I'm gonna do with Sokka. In the show, he has a boomerang, not really an option in this game. So I'm gonna have to figure something else out. In the meantime, I reach level 3 by exploring. Then I stop by the goblin party. This causes Withers to show up in camp, and I'm gonna need him to respec. So Aang is gonna be a Way of the Four Elements monk, literally a class made for the Avatar. This subclass gives him a bunch of different elemental abilities. Although there is one glaring problem. There are no earthbending abilities here, so Aang is gonna have to find a different way to earthbend. A problem for the future. Katara meanwhile gets 2 levels in Wizard, just to get access to some code spells. As for Sokka, I decided he was going to be a bard. In the show, Sokka doesn't really fight that much, so I'm just gonna have him be moral support. Also, I remember this one episode where he did poetry, so that's my entire justification. And there we go, we're ready to fight. We have the power of air, and the power of water. Now Aang has the ability Fist of Four Thunders, which is basically just Thunder Wave, and I think it makes a lot of sense to count thunder spells as airbending, because if you think about it, thunder is just sound, and sound is just moving air. I mean, look at it. That is undeniably airbending. But just because the elements are now at our disposal doesn't mean the fights are going to be easy, especially because Aang only has 4 key points, meaning he can only airbend twice per battle. In other words, not very impressive for somebody who's supposed to be a master airbender. It was clear we needed to level up. If Aang is gonna save the world, he's gonna need to be a lot stronger. But with some hard work, the help of his friends, and of course the guidance of Avatar Roku, I'm sure Aang will get there. So as the comic relief character, Sokka of course has the ability to make our enemies laugh. See, him being a bard makes total sense. But even with the power of comedy on our side, we're still probably not strong enough to face the goblin leaders. At least not without help, which is why I freed Halsin, because having a giant raging bear on your side is bound to be helpful. Whoa, he's an airbender too. But Aang is supposed to be the last airbender. Alright, with Halsin, the second to last airbender with us, fighting the goblins should now be a lot easier. Although there are a concerning amount of goblins coming at us. Still, it's kind of hard to lose when you have Halsin on your side. The battle was going pretty well for us. But then Priestess God did something surprising. She earthbent. Yep, she dropped a stone statue onto Aang. This blew my mind. How many times have I fought her, and I never knew she can do this. Yet despite her impressive earthbending skills, it still wasn't enough to save her from being mauled. And with Gut dealt with, we go into her chambers, beat up her ogre, then we take a secret tunnel into the Underdark. I'm going on a bit of a detour because there's a lot of good stuff down here. At the Myconid colony, I do a bit of shopping. None of the items I bought are game changing, but if you're curious, here's a list. Afterwards, I recruit Glut, because I'm gonna need his help to defeat Gekko. First, I get rid of this guy by airbending him to his doom. Then I start the fight with Gecko by shoving him off a ledge. He survives, but it was still very satisfying. And thanks to our chubby mushroom friend, the battle goes our way. But after winning, Glut invites me to betray the MacLeod colony. And as the Avatar, I cannot stand for treachery. So unfortunately, we fight. And something funny happens. Glut's zombie that he reanimated decided to fight on our side. That's right, he decided that he liked us better than his own creator. How fitting is it that the traitor gets betrayed by his own creation? And with Gecko dead, I get access to the reward room in the MacLeod colony, where I pick up the icy metal. This is a component to a very powerful weapon. Another piece is on this drow next to the successor tree, so I go ahead and relieve him of the component. And the final piece is on this petrified drow next to the spectator. I want nothing to do with the spectator, so I'm just gonna wait for the drow to perish, take what I need, and run. And with all three pieces, I can combine them to make the Morning Frost, an incredible staff that can chill enemies, making them vulnerable to cold damage, and essentially doubling the cold damage they take. A massive upgrade for Katara's water bending. And with that, we should be ready to face Mandara. Or so I thought. Alright, not messing around with her. I destroy the bridge and send her plummeting into the darkness. And the final goblin leader is Ragzalin. I start the battle with a ray of frost to his face, and for some reason only a few enemies join the fight. Somehow these two goblins have no idea what's happening to their boss, or they just don't care. And to beat Ragzalin, all I really had to do was just hit him from a distance while running away. And he couldn't really get close to us at all. And not to mention, he didn't stand a chance against Sokka's jokes. So this was a pretty clean victory for Team Avatar. And that was all three goblin leaders defeated, which means Aang can now waterbend. Now before entering Act 2, I wanted to grab a few items. Most importantly, the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation, which increases the damage of elemental cantrips. This goes to Katara because Aang doesn't use cantrips. She's really hitting hard now. I also wanted to fight Nier, so I recruited the help of the Dwagar. Then I had Aang use some firebending to ignite some bombs and blow up the rocks. I'm allowing this because he does actually use firebending once in season 1, so this is my one time. So my strategy to defeat Nier was to push him into the lava. But that plan didn't quite work out, and instead Aang was the one getting knocked into lava. This was a disaster, and already it seemed the battle was lost. But then, something so incredibly stupid happened. Nier jumped into the lava. He jumped into the lava to finish off Aang. Wow, imagine hating somebody that much. Aang was almost certainly dead, but Nier just had to make sure. Aang must have done something awful to Nier in a past life. Nier doesn't perish in the lava, but he certainly made it easy for me to finish him off. And suddenly this unwinnable battle was won. And as my prize, I claimed the Ring of Absolute Force, which should very slightly increase the power of Aang's airbending. And with that, it's time to proceed to Act 2, where I fight some shadows, blast away some birds. And now I think it's time to introduce a new member to Team Avatar. And of course I'm talking about Toph, our earthbender. There she is. She's a halfling druid. Now the big issue is there are not really that many options for earthbending. There's Flaming Spear, which creates a big fiery rock. Now I know what you're saying, that rock is on fire. Isn't this firebending? Well, I looked it up and apparently lava bending is a subclass of earthbending. So I'm just gonna say it's that. Look, it's a big moving rock. It's earthbending. There's also spike growth, a spell that turns the ground into spikes. This one is undeniably earthbending. And those are her only two spells. Let's put our new team member to the test. We're fighting Karnus. I start by laying down a spike growth, and my strategy was to keep pushing Karnus back with Thunder Wave, which would force him to repeatedly walk through the spikes. A weirdly effective strategy. I guess Otto's legs aren't good for jumping. This strategy took about 40% of his life, however it didn't work every time, and the moment it failed, Karnus took his vengeance. Now one annoying thing is that both earthbending abilities required concentration, so Toph can either be using Flaming Spear or Spike Growth, but never both at the same time, which meant most of the time she really wasn't doing anything. Luckily for this fight, I had Katara on the rooftop sniping down Karnus, and after one little bump from the Flaming Spear, the big spider was done for, and with the lantern in my possession, it's on to Moonrise Towers, where my priority is to save the prisoners. So I destroyed his scrying eyes. I destroyed the guards. And I destroyed the warden. And with them dealt with, the prisoners can safely escape. And as a reward, Aphira gives us the Potent Robe, an amazing item that gives bonus damage to cantrips based on charisma. With this, I go ahead and change Katara into a sorcerer with high charisma, and now her damage is even higher. So Katara is pretty clearly our strongest character. I didn't mean for this to happen, but there just happens to be a lot of good synergies for code sorcerers. So far, water seems to be the strongest element, at least in Baldur's Gate 3. From there, I began clearing out Moonrise Towers. However, it wasn't exactly an easy task. Wow, Aang just cannot catch a break. He's always either getting one shot or dying in the stupidest ways. Eventually though, I realized with the power of airbending I could one-shot people too, using a little thing called gravity. God, I love pushing people off ledges. It's literally my favorite thing to do. In the game, not in real life. After filling the ocean with bodies, we reach level 7, which means Toph can now summon mud methods. And as everybody knows, mud is just wet earth, so Toph is pretty much just a summoner, which feels really wrong for her character, but it is what it is. From there, I go ahead and deal with Drell. However, for some reason, she doesn't fight back, which made me feel like a bad person. Then I go on a bit of a boss rush. I really wanted to reach level 9 before facing Kefric, so I defeat the Greedy Thorn by giving her an existential crisis. I defeat the Alcoholic Thorn by outdrinking him. However, I fail my rolls against the Malpractice Thorn, and unfortunately I have to fight him. And of course, Aang gets one shot immediately. For this fight, Spike Growth was extremely useful. He could barely move at all while standing on the spikes, so all I had to do was keep my distance while hitting him with Rays of Frost. And soon enough, he was down. My next target was Balthazar, who I hate fighting, so I'm just gonna get somebody else to do it for me. So I have Toph use some earthbending to open this stone door. And this forces Balthazar into the fight against the Justiciars. And as they duke it out, I just sit back and watch. Now the problem is, Balthazar usually ends up winning this fight. But that's okay, because it's just a matter of waiting for the right moment to stab him in the back. It's a dirty tactic, but at this point I already beat up a defenseless woman, so whatever. Somehow we still almost lost this battle, but we get him at the end. It took me a lot of fighting to get to level 9. Too much to show all of it. But I finally level up after a hard fought battle against the Githyanki at the bridge. Those arrows are brutal. This was a really difficult battle, but it gets me to level 9. Which means Aang's bending gets stronger, and Toph can now summon an Earth Elemental. And now that we're all powered up, it's time to face Kefric. I start by slamming him with Ice Storm from above, then I hit him with a Spike Growth from below. My summons then surround him, and the summons were actually pretty effective against him, just not in the way you might think. He smashed through the methods easily, but they explode on death, meaning he took damage every time he popped one. And another thing is, whenever anything dies near Kefric, he creates these skeletal eggs, and these things also explode. So basically, there were a lot of things exploding in Kefric's space. In the meantime, he didn't really move that much, I guess because of the Spike Growth, so I just pummeled him with air and ice attacks. And after eating another faceful of mud, Kefric was done. He had enough. He ran away with his tail between his legs. So that's another milestone complete, which means Aang can now earthbend. Now, the only way he can earthbend is by using scrolls, which is why it's a good thing I've been stocking up on them. And with a second Earth Elemental joining our side, it was time to face Mirko. What the heck? You cannot trust an elevator in this game. So Aang survived the jump down, but Toph didn't. Must be because he's an airbender. Well, that was weird, but let's move on. We have a boss to fight. Now, I got lucky with my persuasion rolls, which means Kefric drops off a ledge, and I didn't even need to push him, and we can get straight to fighting Mirko. I start by having Aang drink a potion of flying. In the show he can fly using his glider, so it's a thing he can do. I then haste him up and send him over to free Dame Aelin. It's then over to the Mind Flayer, and I blast him down to the ground. Katara then follows up with 2 Ice Storms. and if you couldn't tell, I really wanted that Mind Flayer dead, but it wasn't quite enough. Luckily, Mirko actually finished the job for me. His Call of the Damned ability hits pretty much everything, even the poor Mind Flayer. From there, I block up all these flesh ropes using chests. And the reason for this is to stop the Necromites from being able to climb up onto the platform and healing Mirko. Now the stars of this fight ended up being the Earth Elementals. Although their damage wasn't the most impressive, they were really good at taking hits, which was basically their main job. They took up Mirko's attention pretty much the entire fight, and even when they ended up going down, I could just summon a new one. And oddly enough, the Flaming Spear also turned out to be really good against Mirko. This thing is immune to necrotic damage, so it could just tank Gaze of the Dead without taking any damage. So while Mirko was distracted fighting some rocks, I was free to slam him with elemental attacks. So earthbending turned out to be Mirko's weakness. It was a slow fight, don't get me wrong, but I felt like I had total control the entire time. And it was only a matter of time until Mirko fell. From there, it was on to Act 3. But first, I had to deal with these Githyanki. Fortunately, in the Astral Realm, for some reason, Aang's airbending is much stronger, and he was able to send many of the Gith flying, so I didn't have too much trouble with them. And now that we're in Act 3, I think it's time to make some very important changes regarding Sokka. I'm not gonna lie, he hasn't been pulling his weight. I mean, in the last boss fight, he literally tried to make the God of Death laugh, and that was one of his only few contributions. Luckily, in the show, he does actually get an upgrade. He learns how to use a sword, which is why I'm turning him into a Sword Bard. Now he can slice up our enemies, while also making them laugh sometimes. And now my goal is to get into Baldur's Gate, and there are a lot of ways to do so, but I choose to pick up this murder list and show it to this weird looking Sky Bison. Nothing I just said made any sense, but nonetheless we now have access to the city, where I do a little bit of shopping. Again, nothing game changing, but here's the list anyways. I then go to fight Loroakan. This guy has an Earth Myrmidon, an Air Myrmidon, a Water Myrmidon, and a Fire Myrmidon. And you know what that means. This guy is out here pretending to be the Avatar. How dare he? I've gotta teach this baker a lesson. So I beat up his summons. Then I show him what a real master of the elements looks like. Then I head to the bottom of the tower to pick up the Marco Hashir, one of the best staffs in the game. It has a bunch of different elemental modes, including one that increases the power of Aang's airbending. It also grants him the spell Destructive Wave, so this was a much needed power boost for Aang. And with that, I think it's time to debut the final member of Team Avatar, our one and only firebender, Zuko. His burn scar is a bit off, and if you're wondering why he's an elf, it's because there are no male human hirelings. Also, I just realized here that you could rename the hirelings. I probably should have done that with Toph. And speaking of Toph, I'm gonna have to put her on the bench for now. I can only have 4 party members, and to be honest, earthbending doesn't feel quite right in this game. So I feel bad about this, but Toph is the character that feels the most off. As for Zuko, he's going to be a sorcerer, but on top of that, I'm giving him a crit build. So I loaded him up with a bunch of items that increases critical hit chance. The Knife of the Undermountain King, the Dead Shot, the Dark Justiciar helmet, and the Risky Ring, which gives advantage on attacks, essentially doubling his crit chance. Although there is the drawback of giving disadvantage on saving throws. On top of that, for even more crit chance, I leveled him up as a champion, and gave him the spell Sniper Feet. And the result of all this is that Zuko now has an absurd crit chance. From there, we take a little trip underwater because we're saving the Ghanaians. At first, I actually thought about skipping this mission, but as the Avatar, I'm pretty sure it's my duty to save people. So that's just what I do. I kick some fish ass, and I free some Ghanaians. I got mostly everybody, except these 2 knuckleheads, they were too slow. I then move on to the Foundry, where there are even more Ghanaians in danger. And initially, the fight was going well. I hit them with some air, then I hit them with some ice. And the Ghanaians could lightning bend, which was pretty nice. But then they activated the motivator. And if you don't know what this thing does, basically if I don't disarm it in time, the Ghanaians explode. So I send Zuko to disarm it, but he fails the row. And for some reason, I just assumed I would get a second chance. I thought I would be able to try again with a different character. That's not really how it works. What have I done? What the hell was I thinking? Sending the firebender to disarm a bomb. At least Xander lived. Somehow. From there, I dove deeper into the foundry. And yep, they're dead in here too. Wow, I really let them down. The least I can do is avenge them. So I have Zuko lay down a wall of fire along the stairs. And I have to say, that wall of fire did some work. How hard is it to avoid a stationary wall of fire? Very hard, apparently. Because the enemies just kept walking into it. It was like they had no sense of self-preservation. It's no contest, Zuko was the star of this fight. But afterwards, I went outside and noticed something troubling. Xander was under attack. I rushed out as quickly as I could to save him, but it was too little, too late. I am the worst avatar ever. From there, I beat up the big robot, blow up the foundry. Then I have a little talk with Wolverine.
The Gondians who litter the streets are as much your kills as they are mine.
He looks so guilty. Well, that was a disaster. On to Gortash. I send Zuko in to fling some firebolts at them, and the plan is just to get their attention and lure them outside. Because I really don't want to deal with these stupid bombs. Gortash runs outside alone, and here I had a brilliant idea. It was time for some earthbending. So I had Aang create a wall of stone blocking the doors, essentially trapping all of Gortash's followers inside the building. They try to break down the side doors but fail. Somehow they were still able to attack me through the windows, but for the most part, Gortash was now alone. And although he was immune to air and firebending, he wasn't immune to swords. He wasn't immune to waterbending, and he wasn't immune to getting crushed by a giant rock. So that was Gortash dealt with, but we still had his followers to deal with, and something weird happened. One of them walked straight through the stone wall. What the heck? How's that possible? But despite their physics-defying powers, we were still able to beat them. And with Gortash defeated, the final milestone is complete, which means Aang can now firebend. And that is all 4 elements mastered, which means Aang is now ready to save the world. But first we have some bosses to deal with. Defeating Saravok was simple enough. Then of course it was on to Orin. I wish I could say this fight was easy too, but no, she kicked our asses. It was a slaughter. The 4 elements couldn't do crap against her. Before this, I was actually feeling that my party was pretty strong, but Orin just made Team Avatar look like a bunch of chumps. I was really struggling with this fight, but eventually I think I just got lucky. Because for some reason Orin just started fighting really badly. She spent her first turn just transforming. Then on her second turn, all she really did was jump and growl at us. And her next turn wasn't really that much better, so it seemed like Orin was going easy on us. I guess she felt bad after stomping us so hard earlier. And I took full advantage of her mercy by going after her followers. And once they were all gone, I focused Orin down using Scorching Rays. Since it hits multiple times, it was very good at burning through her unstoppable stacks. And once those were all gone, there was nothing stopping Zuko from melting her away. And with that, it's on to the final battle. For this fight, I'm gonna need some help, so I summoned some distractions. I summoned some allies. Then for one final time, I push a guy off a cliff. And we fight our way towards the crown. This was a challenging fight, as always, but it was nothing Team Avatar couldn't handle. We got to the crown just fine. Well, mostly. Aang got obliterated, because of course he did. But I bring him back to life, then heal him up with some spirit water. Then it's through the portal to face the Nether Brain. And because I succeeded this super difficult role earlier, the brain starts at a lower life total. And for this fight, I had to do something special. So to display my mastery over the elements, I was going to beat the brain in the order of the elements. So on the first turn, I attacked the brain purely with water bending. Then on the next turn, I used the power of earthbending to rough up the brain. I also let Sokka get in some hits. Then it was Fire's time to shine. And finally, I had Aang finish the job using his mastery over airbending. Oh crap, he's down. Well, it was a cute idea, but it looks like Katara is gonna have to close this one out. And there we have it. The world is saved, thanks to the power of the 4 elements. Although I have to admit, some of the elements were more useful than others, but I think each one had their chance to shine. And that's it for the video, thanks for watching.